You are listening to Real Men Feel with Andy Grant. Real Men Feel encourages men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been taught, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to engaging in discussions that most men aren't having, but all men can benefit from. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. Now, let's get to it. Hello and welcome to another edition of Real Men Feel. This is your host, Andy Grant. Well, we are still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, unless ideally by the time you listen to it, it's all a thing in the past and no one even remembers what I'm talking about, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But nerves are high, anxiety is high, there's a lot of fear. So today, we're going to talk about a really cheery subject, depression. Joining me today is mental health advocate, podcaster, NAMI speaker, blogger, and coach, Mr. Levin. Al, welcome to the show.
Good. How you doing, Andy? Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to connecting with you for a while. First, I just want to ask, so how are you really at this crazy time?
I'm doing well. It has been really a crazy time, like you said, and I think it's probably been crazy for most listeners. For me here, I'm a school administrator in St. Paul Public Schools, and we recently had a strike. And so all the teachers were on strike. Us administrators were in the building with essentially on our own. And teachers settled and came back to work for about one day. And then we were told that we were going to be working remotely. Teachers started working remotely and then administrators a couple days later. So this week is my first week working remotely as a public school administrator. And so it's really been odd. Mm-hmm. I think St. Paul Public Schools, I give them a lot of credit. They're pumping out a ton of information. We're getting things rolling really fast. We're having remote meetings already and getting ready for distance learning starting after next week, which is our spring break.
Oh, cool. Because I know some places around the country seem to be closing. Some, it seems like it's up to each school, up to each teacher to come up with content, try to get in touch with students. But sounds like you guys have a real centralized plan.
Yeah, we definitely have a plan, and our K through 2 teachers are going to be using a platform called Seesaw primarily, and our grades 3 through 12 are going to be using Schoology, which they've used for a long time. So, it'll be interesting to see it roll out.
Cool. And I was trying to joke about a serious subject, but that's the only way I can talk about it from my experience is to try to bring some humor into it. But are you seeing in students and in teachers and in family and friends, are people really on edge? Are you seeing more depression, or is it not kind of sunk in yet? Or?
It's hard to say about depression, like clinical depression, but definitely people are on edge. People are feeling overwhelmed in many ways. Our staff are trying to work remotely, which they've never done. Our paraprofessionals are trying to figure out their role, and we're trying to meet with them, and they haven't had the, experience on technology like our teachers have. So a lot of it is new to them. They're feeling overwhelmed in that respect, but they're also feeling overwhelmed, being parents or older folks, and everybody's got their own situation. But I think the combined, let's try to, get this online distance learning rolling as quickly as possible, get through all this information being fed to us and understand it and get it up and rolling at the same time dealing with, like I mentioned, family situations and other things. I think a lot of people are overwhelmed. I don't know about depression right now. I think definitely some, but I haven't seen it myself with the people I work with.
Cool. Yeah,
and we're trying, like you mentioned, adding humor and stuff. And it's a fine line too. I have learned the hard way from screwing up myself by, trying to bring light to some things that are very serious and could be very, very triggering for certain people depending on what they're going through. Right. So, and I never want to make light of coronavirus because I want to make sure people are taking it very seriously. Yet at the same time, there's some pretty funny memes out there and things to try to keep some lightheartedness, but not take away the fact that it's important. And that's kind of how I try to do a lot of my advocacy work, at least on Twitter. I try to add humor where I can because it's not a very humorous subject. But I try to add it where I can. And I think people would see if they listen to my podcast, it's all interviews of men. But there are a fair amount of laughs depending on who I'm interviewing and what we're talking about.
Yeah. Cool. So let's dive into that. Tell me about your podcast, which is called The Depression Files.
Yep. So the Depression Files, and the podcast, I have almost 70 interviews published currently. So every single episode is an interview with a man who has dealt with depression and or some other type of mental illness. Originally, my thought was just guys who have gone through depression. And I realized after probably my first 5 interviews, like, wow, these guys are dealing with many mental illnesses. So it was really cool. And I just kind of started promoting it that way and adding the fact that it could be other mental illnesses. And it's really cool to be able to speak to these men and to be able to dig deep and learn about them, their experiences. I have 3 goals for the show. The first goal is to educate those who know little about depression and or other mental illnesses, to support those who are going through depression or another mental illness, and finally to chip away at the stigma. I think there is a lot of power in sharing our stories. And the more people share, the more likely others are to share and or to reach out for help.
Right.
I spoke publicly in front of all the St. Paul Public School administrators and shared my story. And even 2 years after that talk, some people reached out to me to say, you know what, I'm finally talking about the abuse I dealt with as a kid, and sharing that story and advocating around it. So, it's just a testament to the more we share our stories. So I really want to give men voice to share their stories and a platform to do that. And it's been incredible. It's selfishly, I get to learn a ton about so many different mental illnesses. And I just love meeting these men and hearing their stories.
Cool. And you mentioned you had some sort of experience because I was sure that nobody creates something called the Depression Files without first having some experience of their own in regards to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have had 2 bouts of major depression. My first one was really easy to understand why. I had been promoted into a principal position in the district. And at the time I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and 2 newborns. So a lot on the plate. And like many other principals and people who are promoted into those roles, I came into a really challenging position. There were cuts to the budget already, and I was cutting people who I hadn't even met, and we were getting outrageous class sizes, and there were technical issues in the building, and just a lot on the plate. And then to come home to a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 2 newborns was a lot on the plate. And it was also difficult for me because I didn't see the family very often. I was up and at work before anybody was out of bed, and I was always home after dinner, and 9 times out of 10 after bedtime. So after 2 years, so I did start experiencing depression, and I saw my family doctor, and that was a bizarre experience. One of the symptoms I had at the time, at least when I was visiting with him, was kind of fidgeting, and I was pacing in this little office that was 4x4, and I literally couldn't sit down, which was really weird for me. And he walked in and right away was just like, whoa, what's going on? And shared with him my story, and he said, this is definitely depression. He started me on a medication, and I started some talk therapy, and I think I got better after a couple of months, and I was able to stay at work, but it was rough. And then after 2 years as a principal, I asked to voluntarily step down back to an assistant principal, mostly because I wanted to see my family again and be a part of my kids' lives. So, and then my second year as an assistant principal, all of a sudden out of nowhere came my second bout of depression. And I still remember sitting in a car with my brother and best friend saying, you know what, my body feels really different, and this isn't going to be good. and I started to crash, and I crashed hard, and wasn't able to really communicate with people. Found myself at a Thanksgiving dinner sitting at the kitchen island countertop, watching my family and friends like communicating, and I couldn't even associate with them. And I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't sleep at all. And my wife and I talked that night and said, if this is how I am with friends, what's it like at work? And we didn't want my boss. I had a new boss at that time. My second year as an assistant principal, the school got a new principal, a different building than when I was a principal. But I shared with him, and I didn't want him to think I was just incompetent. So my wife and I agreed that I should tell him what was going on. Met with him at a coffee shop the very next morning and shared with him what was going on. And he just said, you know what, go home and take care of yourself. We'll be all right at school. And as I walked out of the coffee shop, he called my wife to say, Al just shared what's going on, and I want you to know he's on his way home, just to make sure he gets there. So obviously he was very supportive. But yeah, so I ended up taking originally 10 days off, and I always call them unstructured days. I had no plans. I was trying to adjust my meds and seeing a psychiatrist, and figured, okay, after 2 weeks, I'll be better and I'll go back to work. But, I wasn't sleeping at all. I couldn't eat. I had a huge knot in my stomach. I was rolling around in bed, not sleeping. I would tell my wife during the day, hey, my psychologist said it's like a brain injury and I need to nap. I would stay in bed for like 3 hours during the day trying to nap and just roll around in bed. But that was like my safe space. So I did that. And I remember laying down with my daughter one night, and because I used to, when they were that age, I would lay down with them and get them to bed. And then my wife would usually wake me up 15 minutes later and be like, okay, they're asleep. And my daughter nudged me in the side, and she was like, all right, Dad, I'm good. And I was like, okay. And I didn't get up. I figured if I laid down long enough with her that I would wake up and it would be time for me to get ready for bed myself. I would create a list of things to do, like do one load of laundry, clean one bathroom, and I couldn't do any of it. I was on the couch or I was in bed. Sometimes I was connected at my wife by the hip, not knowing what I should be doing. It was really, really bizarre. And then I decided to go back to work. There was about a week or 2 week period before winter break, and I thought that would be a good trial period. And I started having I wasn't getting better. And I started having some generalized thoughts of suicide. And I knew that I had a really wishy-washy psychiatric PA. And I went and I told him, hey, I'm having some generalized thoughts of suicide here. Could it be the meds, as paradoxical as it is, that the fact that antidepressants have black box warnings saying that they could increase thoughts of suicide? Or could it be my depression? He said, yeah, it could be either. He raised my meds, and then my suicidal thoughts, my crying bouts got worse. I would hold it together all day. I'd bawl at night. And my suicidal thoughts became a plan. I mean, I found myself doing some really weird things, like in the dark in my bedroom with my laptop open, searching. I just Googled suicide, and the first site I found showed the methods, the number of seconds to death, and the number 0 to 10 and how painful it would be. And I slammed my laptop shut and just couldn't believe I was doing that. Finally, created a plan that was viable, and I knew how I was going to do that, and I couldn't get the thoughts out of my head. As much as I tried, I'd push them away, and then they'd be there like 20 minutes later. And finally, I woke up one night and was dreaming about it, and woke up and was scared as hell, and invited my wife and my sister to go to my psychiatric appointment to support me. And they did. And my sister really put her foot down and said, look, he needs more. Because the psychiatric PA said, you could take work off, but that could be stressful too. And what do you do? What do you tell them? So I did take time off and checked myself into a partial hospitalization program for 3 weeks, which was a great kickstart to the recovery. So that was lengthy. Sorry about that, Andy.
No, never apologize for sharing something like that. No, and I just want to take a minute and take it all in for myself.
Yeah, it's a lot. It got really, really heavy. And like I said, I couldn't even believe the things I was doing, and how much it impacted my focus, my memory, my cognition. I was driving my daughter a block and a half away to pick up a carpool kid who we had driven with many times, and I got lost. It's literally one turn from our house, about 6 blocks, and I got spun around and had to pull over and pull out Google Maps. And I was so embarrassed and worried that my daughter was going to see what I was doing. I was trying not to let her know.
Yeah, everything you it's almost like there's a PTSD for suicide attempts, because everything you're saying, I'm just having different flashbacks, different times in my own life. And yeah, I know that sight, I know those feelings, I know those experiences. So I hear you.
Yeah.
And thank God you had such a supportive family and workplace and community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's so important that people reach out for help, because I mean, I was really close to taking my own life, and I was very close to it. And I know that if I didn't reach out and ask for help, I would have been in dire trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as difficult as it is, that is the most important thing to do, to reach out for help. And some people say, I don't have family. I don't have, a tight friend I can ask, but there's always somebody. It might be a clergy member. It might be a suicide hotline. It might be the ER, depending on where you're at, in your depression. But there is somebody, and you need to reach out. And if you get a bad response, because some people are like, well, I tried and they blew me off. Well, then you try somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. It's so important.
Right. Don't, for God's sake, don't. It's not a sign that you're meant to die if that first person you decide to take a risk with doesn't take it well, or the suicide hotline. You get disconnected. It just is a disconnection. Like, don't try to make it into something else. And
in fact, when I was in a really bad place, the first person I decided to reach out to essentially blew me off. It was somebody who I had worked with, who was a coach of mine, and I said, I'm really in a bad place, really struggling. And it was really difficult for me to reach out. And the person was like, well, we have a coaching relationship. We can't, taint that. And I was thinking, like, this is the most positive person in my life. This is why I'm reaching out. And I got shut down. Wow. And that was really, really hard. But it didn't stop me from then reaching out to others.
I think I might take it for granted as living through that, kind of knowing that so often what people need is just that safe space, just to stand there and hear it.
Right.
That person didn't necessarily have to do anything, but that they couldn't deal with that uncomfortableness. Because I talking to someone who is feeling like they are better off dead, it's so unnatural. It can be so uncomfortable for someone that's never thought that. It's just like it's almost like they just can't deal with it. They don't know what to do with it. Yeah. So it's not a reflection on the person telling them what's up. It's just that they just cannot resonate, or perhaps it troubles them for something that they've never even acknowledged in themselves.
Right.
But it's about them. It's not about you. So don't take it as another slam, a judgment against you. It's just that unfortunately you picked someone that just wasn't capable of hearing it in that moment, at least.
Right. And I tell people, you don't have to be a therapist or a doctor to listen to somebody and to ask somebody if they're okay, and to listen, and to listen empathetically and hear them out and offer support. And, hopefully they aren't in such a dire situation, but you really have to listen closely and make your decision of next steps based on what they're saying.
Right. And in case someone is listening now and is getting, any sort of triggering thoughts of their own, I just do want to share the National Suicide Lifeline in the United States, 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. And just tell someone, just get it off your chest and stop ruminating about it. Because I found that was the worst thing.
Absolutely.
And I always felt better telling someone how bad I felt. Not for the sake of like a drama show, just feeling that a bit of the weight is gone. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So it sounds like from even your first episode that you could tell the people you worked with and you were supported through both experiences, both episodes?
Well, so it's interesting. I told my boss, and that was it at work.
Okay.
And I had no option. I knew I needed off, and I knew I needed to tell. I guess I could have just said I was sick. I think I had only known him for a few months, but we had really bonded, and I really trusted him and shared with him. And but I didn't want anybody else to know. And it's really incredible looking back just how much shame I had. I walked up and down the aisles of Walgreens, our pharmacy and little drugstore. I would walk up and down the aisles to make sure no neighbor was in there before I went to the counter to ask, like, God forbid somebody heard I was asking for an antidepressant, right? So I would walk the place and make sure no neighbor was in there. And then I'd get home and I would tear up the paperwork into tiny little pieces as if somebody might go through my trash and see the name of an antidepressant. Like, it's really, really odd. Or I went to a behavioral health clinic that was, not too far from St. Paul where I work, and I've been in the school district since '99. So I know a lot of people in St. Paul, and it was a behavioral health clinic. So I couldn't say, yeah, if I bumped into somebody, I'm here for my yearly physical. I'm in a behavioral health clinic. So I was tempted. I asked, do a lot of people from St. Paul come here? And they were like, yeah. And I was very close to leaving my psychiatrist because I didn't want to bump into somebody who might see me there. A lot of shame involved in it. And I think that's part of the challenge of reaching out.
Did you ever face the stigma of it, or was it just fear of the potential of even having stigma against yourself?
I think it was mostly the fear of the stigma and avoiding people. I mean, even when I was at home, I wouldn't go out to the store because I didn't want to see somebody to have to explain why I wasn't at work.
Right.
You look healthy, you look fine.
Yeah.
So I never, and I had already communicated with my boss and he was supportive. So I can't really say that I felt the stigma now that you ask, but I definitely believe there's a strong stigma out there. I think it's still, and I think that's partly where the shame comes from. I think, and a lot of people, even NAMI has come out and said, we shouldn't use the word stigma. We should use the word discrimination. And I have my own take on that. I believe if we could get rid of the stigma, there would be less discrimination. So I think it's important to talk about both, because if there was no stigma, nobody would be discriminating, right? We would understand what it's about, and we would have more empathy for people, just like we do when somebody's out because of cancer or a heart disease.
Have you ever looked at what the shame was rooted in? Like, were you conscious of what you were afraid of happening?
I think for whatever reason, just a mental illness comes with the shame. I think many people, I mean, I can't say everybody has that. That would obviously not be correct. And I don't think I would have it again. Luckily, I've only had the 2 bouts of depression. I've been, mentally fit for a long time, but I believe the work I'm doing is helping to chip away at the stigma by getting men to speak about it. But I do think, it's hard to say.
Because like whatever fear was keeping you quiet then has obviously been shattered since you're speaking publicly, you're doing your podcast. Right. I'm just wondering if you ever have you ever realized, this is what I was afraid would happen, but I see that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think the mental illness, for one thing, just impacts your mind and your brain so much that that you can't think logically. You can't understand that this is just an illness like cancer or something else. But I do think also it is the reactions many people have. I've been writing a blog as well, also called The Depression Files. And I would have one of the teachers who I work with know about my blog, and she'd come into my office. She would still walk all the way back by my desk and whisper to me, I read your last post. And I'd be like, it's not a secret. You can say that out loud,
Yeah.
but there's still this tendency that we don't really talk about it. We keep it a secret.
Yeah.
If somebody dies by suicide, it's maybe a little more common that people are willing to share that. And I understand the difficulties also because those sharing, it isn't that person. But I don't know. I do feel like the stigma is still there. Some of it is self-stigma, like you're kind of pointing out the fact that I wasn't really discriminated against. I didn't really, but yeah. So I think some of the stigma is within, and I think definitely there are plenty of stories about people not getting hired or getting fired and such because of a mental illness, or not getting the accommodations that they would if they had another physical illness.
Right. Yeah. So I dealt with depression, suicidal thoughts from a really young age. So I'd kind of, by the time I'm in college, I was like, I don't care. Like my attempts to hide it didn't work. So I didn't care who knew. So I've never really had to deal with that as an adult.
Right.
I've been pretty open and actually a couple of years ago, last time I was on a job hunt, now job applications like, oh, do you want to say that you have any sort of mental illness for the sake of, tracking and government? I don't even know what I said. I'm like, should I say yes? Like, well, am I likely to be more hired now? Are they looking for the mentally ill? Like, what should I do with this question now? So now it's like, has it totally flipped? Like they're trying to get us. So
that's funny.
It's really bizarre. But yeah, I always like to, ask people about what they're, because I know that I've discovered, in my life, action cures fear.
Right.
Everything I used to be terrified of, now I do. I'm like, oh my God, this is the thing I used to be totally afraid of anyone finding out. And now I talking about it all the time. And I just wondered if you've had those moments of realizations.
I think, like you said, now that I'm talking about it and everything, I have no fear of it. And I'm trying to work at diminishing the stigma. But at the time, I certainly had a lot of fear of people knowing, people finding out. I think it was unfounded. It would be interesting to me. I do not want to go through another bout of depression, but I am kind of curious, like, would I be able to share it and feel the way I do now about others who are living with a mental illness? Or would I fall into this shame again if depression fell upon me again? I really don't know the answer, and I hope I never know the answer because I really don't want to get there again. I think everybody's depression is very different, right? I talk to men who, some guys or people in general, right? I just reference men because that's who I've been interviewing, but people have different types of depression. Some live with what used to be called dysthymia, which is now just called chronic depression. And so it's a low grade, although they may disagree and say, no, it's not low, right? But a constant depression. Others go through cycles, some that are easy to recognize the cycle. So for example, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, where it's coming around in the winter, typically in those dark days, dark months. And then they're okay until the next winter. Some are going every few weeks, they hit a depressive cycle, and some are just cycling on and off and there's no pattern. The depression I have had, at least so far, was a depression in 2010 and a depression in 2013. They were both incredibly awful, and I would never wish them upon my worst enemy, which is part of the reason I'm out advocating. But I feel really pretty lucky to be the type of person who is not cycling through. But I'm still on medication. I'm still going to a men's support group for depression and anxiety every other week. I'm doing the podcast, so I'm talking about it and sharing about it. I'm trying to make sure I'm exercising more. So I'm definitely in a different place about watching for it and taking care of it. But I feel lucky for two reasons. One, I do feel lucky that I've gone through it because it really gives me a different kind of empathy for people with a mental illness. And I certainly had some of the very negative stereotypes that I'm even embarrassed to mention, but will, because I think it's important. Like in my mind, mental illness, I would think of somebody begging on the street for money, and I wouldn't even think like, why, what might have happened to them to get them in that place, but that was one of my very negative stereotypes. So I think, it has grown me immensely with a different type of empathy. And I get to like I said, interview and learn so much about it. And I really feel like I'm helping people. It's an incredible feeling to feel like I'm doing good and putting good out into the world and supporting people and hopefully saving lives. And that feels really, really good. So, so I'm thankful that I went through the depression. And like I said, I'm very thankful that I've had 2 bouts and hopefully never another one.
I have definitely felt that and met a lot of people that do that too. But could I have dared tell you that in your first major depression, you're home, you can't work? Because I said, oh, there's going to be a day that you're going to be glad for this, and all these great things will come from it.
No way. Absolutely not. Never would have thought it. Never would have thought it. And that's part of the reason, I'm a huge believer in support groups. Like I said, I still go. And part of it is you get to meet others who are there, right, in a really deep, dark place, and you get to support them. They get to see where people have come to, those who are feeling better, and you get to support one another. And it's like instant trust, right? I walked in. My first night I went to the support group was the night before I checked myself into the partial hospitalization program. I walked through the door. I cried for 2 hours in front of like 8 strange men sharing my story. Didn't want the 2 hours to end because it was like the first safe space I had ever felt. And I remember just like bawling, and then at the end being like, is this confidential? Because again, this shame still creeped in, right? Like nobody's going to say where I work, So, but support groups, I think, are really can be really beneficial. And usually there's no cost, right? A lot of people who are looking for help don't have the funds to get a therapist.
In your first kind of public outing of yourself, was it a podcast? Was it a public speaking engagement? What was the first big public step for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once I was healthy, probably I bet a good 2 years out or so, I decided to share my story. And I even thought about sharing it with the staff I worked with, but then I was like, this is going to become all about me. And really it's about the work. So I decided to create a blog. I had never blogged before. Decided to create a blog, and I wrote my story. That was the first entry of my blog. And then I started like Googling my blog, and I couldn't even find it, like knowing where it was. So I was like, okay, well, that's not working. So then I created a Twitter account to my blog and started writing more, posting more. And on Twitter, really all of my Twitter feed was essentially trying to drive traffic to my blog. And then I started getting recognized by some people in the mental health world, and I got invited to a conference. And from the conference, I came away from a conference. It's an amazing conference that is for online advocates of chronic illnesses. So it's chronic illnesses of all types. It's put on by Janssen. So I was a little nervous because that is a pharmaceutical. It's a division of Johnson & Johnson. They pay for advocates to get together to come out to a conference, but the advocates run the show. They invite the speakers, and they have big speakers. Twitter's there, YouTube's usually there. A lot of the advocates present. And somebody from there reached out to me and said, hey, we're trying to ramp up our mental health advocates. We have a lot for HIV, psoriasis, different stomach illnesses, cancers, and we're trying to ramp up mental illness, and you aren't a shoo-in, but we'd love it if you applied. And I applied and got in. And from that conference and meeting all these different advocates was amazing. And it's really kind of interesting because there was not a single session on a podcast there, but for whatever reason, I walked out of there with this idea to podcast. And through a contact I made there, a YouTuber, she had connected me with a big podcaster, Paul Gilmartin of Mental Illness Happy Hour. And I reached out to him, and he was so helpful. He just fired me back a huge letter of tips and advice for a podcast. And then that's how the podcast came around. And then I was really nervous to launch it, right? Like the way I started, it's kind of funny. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I bought 2 mics, 2 headphones, and I went to my support group, and where I go, they had about 10 different support groups. So I asked if the leaders would share what I was doing. So I invited guys one at a time down in my basement, recorded the podcast. And it was so funny. My daughters would be on the couch and someone would knock on the door and they'd be like, "Another strange man coming over, Dad?" I'd be like, yeah, yeah. And then eventually I realized I was going to tap out of resources. So I went to Skype so that I could interview men from around the world. But what I did at first was I had about 6 or 8 episodes created before I ever launched it. And this little piece of me was like, if I never launch it, nobody can critique me. I can't fail at it. Maybe I'll just keep it here. It's been fun. But then all of a sudden on September 10th, I think it is, was World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. And I had one episode that I had edited. I was like, oh my God, if there is ever a day to launch the Depression Files, today is the day. So I launched it then. And now it's been about 2.5 years that it's been going. I publish every other Sunday. And I have really, really tried hard to get a very diverse group of men. And it's been pretty incredible. I have from an NFL player to an ER surgeon to war veterans to a transgender male, all different types of people. Some are advocates themselves, some aren't. I've targeted Black men at times, so that I can get people of color on the show and talk about their experience. And then the different mental illnesses, it's pretty unbelievable, actually. I mean, from every mental illness you could name, I probably have had on the show. From DID, dissociative identity disorder, which is the old multiple personality disorder, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, associative disorder. I just like everything. And like I said, selfishly, it's been amazing to talk to these people and to learn about everything and to hear different perspectives is another thing I like to bring to the table. So I may disagree with somebody, but I'm going to let them share their perspective. If I really disagree with it, then I get put in a bind where I'll push back sometimes and say, I might disagree a bit with that, but it's been an amazing gig for me personally.
Cool. And talking to so many men, have you come across any commonalities in all those different stories?
So that's a great question. I think the most common thing I hear, one, is that a lot of men in hindsight can pick out some clear symptoms they had as a kid that were hints of mental illness. But they didn't realize it at the time, and maybe their parents weren't attuned to it, or maybe they're old enough now that back then nobody talked about it and just thought maybe you were quirky or different. I think that's probably the biggest one. And then quite a few men with bipolar disorder I have found originally land with a diagnosis of depression and then get put on an antidepressant, which kicks off a really powerful mania because of the antidepressant. And then they realize and get diagnosed with bipolar disorder because possibly they had some smaller manias and not really realized it. So that's been a fairly common one as well. But the other thing I do and that I love doing too is speaking publicly. I was, like you mentioned, I spoke a lot for NAMI. Speaking for NAMI has been a little challenging because it's often during the workday and I have a typical hourly job, typical hours. But I have spoken a fair amount on my own now, and I love to do that. And the new thing lately that I'm trying to speak more about, if there's any listeners who want to hear more about it, is everybody knows about the mental health struggles of the kids in education, and we're not servicing them as much as we need to. There aren't enough beds. There aren't enough doctors. They need way more help than we can give, but at least people are talking about them and trying to make changes. Nobody is talking about educators. And I believe even before coronavirus came, particularly in an urban school setting like where I work, teachers are dealing with kids who are going in and out of complex trauma on a daily basis. Kids are having behaviors because of the trauma they're experiencing. We are on the receiving end of that trauma often. and teachers are stuck in their classroom all day long, and they don't get a break from it. So, and it's well known, secondary trauma or compassion trauma, right? And nobody's talking about it. And I don't know why, but I think we're going to see a lot more need for support for educators because they are burning out. The job is stressful enough. You deal with angry, yelling parents. You got administrators sometimes breathing down your necks, doing formal observations. And then, I don't know, let's say elementary school teacher has to rip a scissors out of a kid's hand because they're going for their own neck. And then, you know, they call for support. We get the kid away, and then we're like, okay, continue your math lesson. Thank you. You know, and we have an EAP, Employee Assistance Program. So we do get 4 free counseling sessions, confidential, but that's a drop in the bucket, right? And I think we can create a better system of supports for our educators. And that's something that I would love to develop and share with districts because I think there's a huge need. And I don't know how many more suicides and mental health leaves of absences we have to wait for before somebody says, yes, let's look at the educators, let's figure this out and support them more, because there's a dire need just in our small building and school district. I've got plenty of examples, and I know we're not an anomaly. In the Twin City metro area in the past 2 years, we've lost 2 principals to suicide. The suicide rate for men in the Twin City metro area in the past 2 years has gone up 18%. So, and the numbers nationwide continue to go in the wrong direction. Numbers of suicides and suicide attempts. It's mind-boggling. Actually, the data was part of the reason I decided to advocate. It was shocking to me to see the data.
So tell me more about the program for educators. What does that look like? What would that look like?
So I would love to be in a position where I'm able to do more research around it. I think there are more companies that are able to do more for their employees than what educators are doing. So I think there are many places who are doing a great job that I would love to try to emulate. Some of my thoughts are like across our school district, I think it's big enough that we should have support groups. We should have support groups for our social workers. We should have a support group for our counselors, a support group for maybe our K-3 teachers, our 4-8 teachers, our high school teachers, so they can share the stories that they're all dealing with. They can see they're not the only one who had a desk thrown at them or a book whipped at them, right? And they can talk about how stressful it is and be able to get that off their chest. Like you mentioned earlier, what a relief it is to be able to share some of that, right? So that's one way. I think we can do, we've brought mindfulness into our school for the kids. I think we can offer some mindfulness and meditation ahead of time before the school day, some optional courses for teachers. We have brought in therapists into our own school for the kids. One grading day, I had our art therapist open up her room for any teachers who wanted to go in, and we did a group session of art therapy around the topic of self-care. And we only had about 8 educators there, but the conversation was amazing. Like they were sharing things that I was just like, whoa, I can't believe, like one session meeting, and they weren't all from the same grade or anything. They weren't super tight, but the things that came up and came out, like, we need to be doing those things on a regular basis. And those are just a couple sample examples.
And those are great. Like those are such low budget things like that.
Yeah.
So budget's not a barrier to the things you've talked about there.
Right. I got a grant from Health Partners, and I created a self-care room in our building. So there's a space where teachers on their prep can go, and there's like a shiatsu massage chair in there. There are iPods I got with headphones so they can listen to meditation, guided meditations, or just music, and different things. Comfortable chair where they can recline. A massager that you can change the head on, so you can give yourself a back massage or rub your legs. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot we could do, and I think it's really, really needed. After I shared my story with the administrators, you know, I had people reaching out to me in tears, like privately, saying like, you just shared my story. And we have people struggling. But after I had shared, I also asked the district, hey, let me do more now. Let me do more. And really, I felt like the door was kind of closed on it. And I don't know if it's like a liability thing that they're worried about, or, oh my goodness, he said the S word, suicide. What do we do now? But they knew what I was going to talk about. So I was really excited and proud of the district to let me share my story publicly in front of 140 public school administrators from our district. I want to do more, and I think we need more for the administrators and the staff, all of the staff.
So, you mentioned beyond people coming and saying, you just told my story when they see you speak, is there a question you're asked most often? Is it something that people want to know more about the most often? Or
as far as educators go?
Anybody, any audience.
Anybody?
Like, yeah, what do you get asked the most?
I think a lot of people are looking for a quick fix. What do I need to do? How do I get better? And really, there's no quick fix, unfortunately. And I feel like our medicines are so far behind compared to every other ailment and illness and medical, all these new developments they come out with. But still, our antidepressants are take one and wait 6 weeks to see if there's an effect. And if there's not, we'll try another one. And then you wait another 6 weeks. And of all the illnesses, to have a mental health, a brain disorder where you may be considering suicide, that's not the one we want meds to wait. Yeah. So I've been excited now that they came out with esketamine, some different types, which is a whole new classification of drugs. So I'm hoping to see more kind of evolve from those pieces. But I do think people have to create a tool belt of go-tos. And I always say it takes time and effort, but it definitely takes effort to get better. Yeah. Like it's wrong if you think you can even just pop a pill and just wait for it to get better. Yeah. You need to do things like exercise, like journal, like get outside. There's a lot that you can do to work towards getting healthy. Find a support group, go to a therapist. And I understand some people frown upon meds, and I kind of feel like to each his own. But my big thing about meds is don't judge people. Some people, it's a difficult decision for anybody to take a medicine or not that's going to have some kind of impact on their brain. But don't go pill shaming people. Don't go bad mouthing people. People are making difficult choices. Yeah. It works. That is a stigma that I definitely hear from people who I think are really not like really attuned to mental illness, to social justice and anti-racism. But some people who will still say like, yeah, so-and-so didn't take their pills today, as if, they're acting crazy, so those types of, and I do think that there can be implications to language use like that. Because that, if you say that in front of somebody who is taking medicine, what does that say to them?
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. There is it's a different stigma, and even, people that can be doing their best to support people with mental illness. And there can be a whole, oh, you're doing that. Oh, well, that's the wrong thing to do. And that, so, but I was medication gave me nothing but side effects. But at times it was like, well, at least I'm willing to take, like, that's when I'm willing to give me something. I'm trying to do something. So that was always, me and my family saw it as a positive sign. Even if it didn't help, I was like willing to do something. And that was a good sign.
For sure. And I've heard a lot of men say side effects, right? So, and then it's a matter of maybe trying a different medication, right? And it's weighing the benefit and the risk, right? Like, is your side effect better than possibly being suicidal, right? Is it a side effect that you can live with that's okay? Is it just dry mouth, right? Or is it a sexual deal and you're trying to get pregnant? Like, so there are different things to weigh out around side effects. I've been really happy on the medicine I've taken which I would say has zero side effects that I've noticed. I do know that at first the doctor told me for 2 days you're going to experience, I still remember exactly what he said, and I remember those days, dry mouth, dizziness, and your anxiety is going to skyrocket. And for 2 days, it's really weird. My anxiety was so high that now I'm like tuned into it. So now that if I have just a little bit of anxiety that I never thought of, I even had any, but now I can spot it pretty easily. Like, oh, there it is. I can feel it in my stomach or whatever it might be. Because I think I was at such a high level that I now am able to recognize it more. And, another strategy that I use a lot, if I feel anxiety coming on, I'll do the deep breathing, 3 deep breaths. And the breathing is awesome. I mean, you can change your blood pressure, your heart rate, so many things with your breath. And it's something that you have with you 24 hours a day, no matter where you are or what you're doing, you can take deep breaths. So
yeah, that's why I love those simplest things, because you can be homeless, you can have no resources, and you can master that skill.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's not there's not a means test to doing some of the things that can make everybody feel better.
Right.
And it's also important to do those things and put things into practice when you're not at your lowest, because that's when it's the hardest to do anything. So to add something new when you're you feel like it's a huge deal to put one foot on the floor and get out of bed. Yeah. And that's going to be the hardest time to start an exercise program, or to start meditating, or even to give a crap and go search YouTube for how do I do deep breathing.
Absolutely.
So do those things, get into a gratitude habit, journaling, exercise, do a support group while you're feeling at least good. If you have a history, like, do it when you're feeling good, so that the downs aren't as down. They're not as steep. They're not as rapid.
And I would say the same for going to a therapist, right? It's okay to go when you're healthy, and you can talk about how rough it was, and you can create strategies with them and things that will help get you out of it. All of that is really talking about building your resiliency, right? Your resiliency, your toolbox, so that you are prepared, right? I'm really confident that I have a lot of things in my tool belt that if I start feeling depression coming on, man, I would hammer all of them. I would be on my elliptical, while talking to someone from my support group, and, I would be eating some celery all at the same time.
So with all that said, is there a book, a program, a habit that you want to share the most, that is kind of the go-to suggestion to people?
The breathing one that I mentioned, I think is really good. I think I love journaling. I journaled every single night through my depression, more than I had ever journaled. And every night I ended my entry with, today, in order to work towards recovery, and I put bullet points. And it might have been literally, I got out of bed, but I wanted to acknowledge that I was working at it, because I didn't feel like I was. So I made myself journal about it. Journaling is great. I think picking up a hobby, if you used to play the guitar, but you haven't recently, to have a hobby really helps to focus on something other than ruminating, like you talked about. So a hobby is great. And also, exercise, and it doesn't have to be big. If you're starting to feel it, try to go out for a walk. I'm not saying a walk is going to cure you from a depression by any means, but it certainly is helpful to get fresh air. You get some exercise. And I think it's important to try to keep up with your social contacts too. Don't question yourself if you start making excuses and you aren't seeing your friends at all anymore. Question yourself, why am I not doing that? Because that could be very much an indicator that you're starting to isolate, which is not good. And men tend to do that.
And to go deeper on that, we're at a time when a lot of people are being forced into social isolation.
Exactly.
So again, we're talking on Zoom, but if you have a phone, you probably have at least 5 apps that let you connect with other people besides just actually calling them, like the freaking 90s or something. You actually make a phone call.
Yeah.
But
and I've been telling people these days with coronavirus, make sure that you are also not just texting, but call, and if you can, Zoom or Skype, so that people can, or FaceTime, so people can see you. Particularly, I think a lot of the elderly are even much more isolated now. My mom is in an assisted living place, and they aren't allowed out of the building. So she can't go out, and they don't even want them out of the room she said, don't let anybody tell on her, but she said she's walking the halls at night just to get exercise when nobody's around. So, reach out. But it is definitely a symptom of depression, is isolating, and it is not healthy.
Yeah.
Right. To just hunker down on the couch and make excuses to not do anything else, or to say you got a lack of energy. It takes effort.
Yeah. Even put it in your own phone and just prompt yourself, call someone, Zoom someone, connect with someone, and even have it show up every 30 minutes until you finally, all right, I'm sick of me bugging myself and I'm going to take some action. Right. There's all sorts of techniques and tools, but texting is the worst means of communication that humans have. The more senses you engage, that makes it more engaging. So sender and receiver, you can just read too much. Like your mood, I'll speak for myself. My mood goes into a text. So I can read any message coming to me. I can read it as, oh, you hateful you're putting me down. Right. What's up? Oh, how dare you ask what's up? But so it's horrible. Like our mood will interpret a text message so many different ways. But if I'm actually seeing you, we can look in each other's eyes and communicate. It brings back the humanity.
Yeah.
And we all have mirror neurons. We're meant to see each other and feel each other and be empathic and supportive. And now more than ever, everybody needs that. If you're
absolutely.
If your mental illness is being too blissfully happy all the time, whatever it is, like share that with somebody.
Absolutely.
So you've got a lot of accomplishments. You're doing a lot of good for yourself, for your family, for your community, for your profession. What are you looking forward to? Is there a big vision for the Depression Files, or for what Al is up to next? Or
there's not really a vision. At times I wish I could just do the mental health advocacy, the public speaking, the podcast, the blog, and focus all of my work on that. So that may be a goal down the line, but I still enjoy working in the schools. I still love being around kids. It's tough too, because I have a stable job with a decent salary and I get health care, and wouldn't have that if I was off on my own. So I'm really enjoying how it is right now. It's a good mix. I get the work, the school, the kids, get to utilize my brain a lot in that job and work with people. And I get to come home and work on the Depression Files and meet men, and even editing the podcast and stuff. I feel like there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. So I really, really enjoy where I'm at right now with kind of both those two pieces. Cool. And my family, of course.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Al, what's the best way that people can find you, get in touch with you, find the podcast?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. My website is thedepressionfiles.com. thedepressionfiles.com. And there you can find my story. You can find my blog, my podcast. And then also you can find out how to reach out to me if anybody does want some coaching or public speaking. I'm looking forward to doing more of that as well. But yeah, they're all on that website.
Cool. And are you especially active on any different social media platform than others? Or?
Yes. Thank you again for asking. One piece of advice I had early on was to really focus on one social media platform. So I'm really quite big on Twitter. Twitter is definitely where I'm tweeting a lot. And so that is where you'll find me. I used to also have my tweets going to my Facebook account, but the Facebook doesn't allow that anymore, or Twitter doesn't allow. One of them don't allow it anymore.
That broke somewhere along the line fairly recently.
So I am on Facebook, but not nearly as much as Twitter. And on Twitter, I'm just at Al Levin 18. Al Levin 18.
Cool. And I'll have all the links and social media contacts for Al at the show notes for this episode at realmenfeel.org. So if you missed anything we talked about, go there and you'll just be a click away to track down Al and dig into the Depression Files further than this. Al, I want to thank you, not for just being here, but for everything you're doing and being, first of all, for asking for help.
Yeah.
And receiving that, and then sharing the fact that you got helped and that you're still here and you're helping other people stay here too.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. You too, Andy, are doing incredible work.
Yeah. unfortunately, we're both needed.
Yeah.
You know, a book I wrote, it hit #1 in the Amazon category for suicide, and I was like, "Yay, gross! Why is this a category?" You know, so I kind of wish we were. I look forward to the day that we're obsolete in the message that we need to share, but that's not today. So cool. So thanks again, Al. Thanks everyone for listening. Wherever you're discovering Real Men Feel, please give a like, a review, subscription, share it with someone else. And through this all, through whatever personal journey you're going through the global journey that we're all going through, support yourself, support your friends, support your family. You are not in this alone. And as always, be good to yourself. Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Contact us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Learn more about Andy Grant at theandygrant.com. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, TuneIn, or wherever you are discovering Real Men Feel.